right, guys, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We all loved Rachel's presentation this morning, so we have a little extra treat for you guys, and she's going to present again. She is going to talk a little bit more about digital marketing and her role at Harley-Davidson. And she's also going to do a little Q&A at the end, so as she's going through her presentation, make sure that you think of some great questions to ask her. So without further ado, here's Rachel again.
It's always an experience. So I'm going to go a little bit, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of history like we just talked about before, but I promise it won't be exactly the same and everything. The other thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is just kind of how we at Harley-Davidson look at digital, specifically kind of what I do from a web property standpoint. And like we said, we should have plenty of time for questions. So if you guys have questions from the last presentation, or if you have questions from this, or just in general, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I will also be here for a little while after. If you guys don't want to raise your hand and ask everybody, feel free to find me after the fact. So as I said before, I talked a little bit in the keynote speech about Harley-Davidson in history. So we've been around since 1903. Who our founders were William S. Harley and Arthur Davidson. We started in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And as I stated in the other presentation, really looking at kind of that first startup garage kind of thing. We have facilities all over the world, but we are located from an international standpoint of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So a few pictures that I have on here that were not in my first presentation is earlier today, you guys, I talked about the shed that we've kind of rebuilt, and if you come to us on an anniversary year at Juneau Avenue, you'll see the replica, or if you go to the museum, you can see it, and that's what's in that lower left-hand corner, but that's actually the shed that they built in the garage that they worked out of when they first started from a Harley-Davidson standpoint. Our first factory, so I work at Juneau Avenue, which is smack dab in the middle of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, downtown. And that is our first factory picture, and then over to the left is kind of a bad picture, sorry guys, about what we look like today, including the fact we still have that kind of obnoxious. Over the years, we talked a little bit before too about motorcycles and how many we built. So as an example, so in 1903 we built 3. Which is huge when you think there's only 4 people working on it. But back in 2014, we were well over 270,000 from a global standpoint. So that's just a little bit of history about us as a motor company, maybe. From a mobile standpoint, today, and I hate to admit this, HD.com is not, as of right now, responsive. The museum site and hog.com are responsive. So what we've had to do over the years is we had to create what we'll call our mobile site. So it's an MDOT site. Not as common as they used to be, and we will get away from it at some point in time. But the thing is and the good thing for us when we have something that's distinguished as a mobile site versus a desktop site is it really gives us as an organization to think about, if I'm coming on my phone to HD.com, what am I truly interested in and what am I really want to do there, right? So some examples of, we have a thing we call Bike Builder. So it's very much that you can go in, you can pick a bike, you can customize the bike, you can add parts to it, you can change the color and so forth. And at the end, you have a bike that's built that you can print something, you can take it to your dealership, and you can theoretically own that bike and order that bike through your dealership. But that is not something that you're necessarily going to want to do on a handheld size phone, because it's something that you probably either want to be on a tablet from a wider screen standpoint or on a desktop because you actually have the time to do it. So we think about that as we're saying, we want you to have the ability to do A, B, and C on your phone, but on your desktop, it's going to be much stronger than that. So for example, I need to find a dealership I want to go to. Well, that's something that you're probably going to use your phone for. So they're on both experiences. The other thing that we do is we have apps. We have a lot of apps. So at Harley-Davidson, a lot of the ones that I'll kind of talk about is we have event apps. So Harley-Davidson has a lot of events. If it is something that we are holding events, meaning they're a Harley-Davidson corporate event, or if it's something that we have a presence at a place such as Daytona or Sturgis. So try to be competitive and kind of get into those markets and be available for people at those. Quite a few of our events, such as Daytona and Sturgis, we have apps that you can download that you can use to help you and make that just a better experience. We also have a motorcycle app. This is a global app. And the reason behind that and why we did that was to have something in a lot of places that either Wi-Fi wasn't available or not as accessible, and it's something that's on your phone and that you can have if you're walking through a dealership, as an example, that doesn't have public Wi-Fi. It is just something that you can reference from a motorcycle standpoint versus having to have Wi-Fi and update a site. So a lot of that, or to access a site, and a lot of that was developed long before the availability of Wi-Fi that it is today. So the one thing I talked about before is everything's on a different platform. May it be good, may it be bad. So the thing that we have is we have what we'll consider a content management development kind of process. So a lot of this from a management standpoint and content standpoint is it spans across region, it spans across the globe, it spans across a lot of stakeholders. So when I look at myself from a standpoint, and so I am one person that works at Harley-Davidson, and I have a lot of stakeholders, right? But my ultimate goal in the end is to create the best online experience for my stakeholder. So someone who's in sales is an example, or in parts and accessories is an example, or works in our service department, for example, comes to me or comes to the digital team and says, I need to create a page about, for example, we just recently did one about DOT4 brake fluid. Not a very exciting topic, right? But they have to communicate a message to consumers, and they come to us and say, this is what I need your help with, and it is our responsibility to create the best digital experience for them online. And basically what we're doing is we're working as a team. So I'm their digital representative coming in and saying, this is exactly what you should be doing based on best standards, best practices, and based on what we do on hd.com. And he or she is coming in and saying, these are my goals, this is what I need to accomplish. The other thing that was huge to us, and is huge to any web experience, is SEO. So if our site is not SEO friendly, and it is not easy for a consumer to search on some sort of topic, such as on Google, and for hd.com to be at the top of that, that's a failure for us. The only place that doesn't apply for us is kind of for me right now, because I manage hog.com. Hog.com is a members-only website. It is a place that you have to own a motorcycle and you need a login to get into. So it's nowhere near as important to be SEO friendly when all you can get to do is that front screen anyways. Then we talk about content management. As I said, it kind of comes down to, it's constantly worked on. We have a team of people who work with our hd.com content management system on a daily basis. We are changing stuff, we are optimizing stuff, we are changing things, they're updating things. Things change on bikes, specs are different than we thought they were, for example. Things are changing on an event. And the great thing is that we have a content management system, we use CQ5. If anyone has any experience with that. It is a content management system that is fast and easy for us to make changes and get things out to the public immediately. If it is a message, such as something that we need to get onto our homepage and get to consumers fast, or if it's literally content is wrong, or something is happening and we need things updated at an event. So a little bit about me. As you guys have heard, unfortunately, a lot about me, but a little bit more about what I do. So as kind of said in the bio, I manage everything that happens on hog.com from a global standpoint. So that is everything from a homepage change to a large-scale project. So one of the things that we just launched recently was, we're calling it the Hog Hub, we'll call it. It's a social experience behind the kind of the scenes of Hog to get people engaged from a social standpoint using hashtags and to kind of get them motivated to share photos and so forth. So everything that I do and any change that happens to hog.com globally, and today we only have 12 locales for Hog, which is nice considering I'm a one-man show. But any change that happens there, I have to be aware of, leadership has to be aware of, and we have to go through the same processes. The other thing that I am currently working on and managing is overseeing any app that Harley-Davidson creates from a corporate standpoint, which can be more challenging than you realize because so there are particular things that we as a global department, such as the motorcycle app or such as the events apps, that we're in control of, we're starting, we're finishing. But there's also a lot of other departments within Harley-Davidson. So for example, if general merchandise is working on some sort of new product that they want to build an app with, I have to be aware of that and ensure that when that goes out to a consumer, that they're getting the best experience possible and that they're following best practices from a digital standpoint as well as from a Harley-Davidson standpoint. And then the next thing on here, from an hd.com standpoint, so the way that our team is broken out today is we actually only have 3 managers within our team. One of them is 100% social. She manages nothing on hd.com, and that leaves 2 of us to manage hd.com in a large scale kind of, you know, mobile or a desktop universe. So the way that it's kind of broken out today is I represent everything that's from a customer experience standpoint, and that's somewhat intentional, right? So I represent Hog, and I also represent anything that we think of when a consumer kind of a touch point in the sense of going to an event or taking a riding academy class or that sort of stuff, and then the other side of it is kind of on the motorcycle side. So really on the product side, our other manager manages that. And that was one of the decisions that was made by our director in the sense of it's just the kind of that makes sense from a consumer standpoint, but also makes sense from an internal standpoint, because I'm always thinking of consumer touch points and out at events and so forth and owners, and she's always thinking from a product standpoint. So it makes it really simple most days for us to kind of communicate with that. And we're definitely day-to-day working together and communicating with each other because we do affect each other, but it's definitely kind of makes that easy fine line. And then that, you know, kind of on here about, you know, ensuring from a standpoint of a lot of our countries and regions, because HC.com isn't a CQ5 standpoint and it isn't a system that our regions and countries can go and update things on their own, making sure that they are also following all of our guidelines and following everything, because it doesn't necessarily happen that way. And kind of some examples down here I talk about. So Hog, we have rentals, we do tours, we do events, we do riding academy. So Harley-Davidson doesn't just sell motorcycles. Kind of as I talked about in the last, you know, presentation, it's also about that emotion, that passion, and that experience that we can give to you. It is not just about trying to sell you the product, it's everything that comes along with it. And to know and to try to show you that as part of purchasing a motorcycle, you know, as part of purchasing a Harley-Davidson, it is about that experience that you get out of it and that personal experience that you get out of it. So here's some examples of stuff that we have done and I have worked on. So from an HC.com standpoint and from an app standpoint. So in your top left is the 110th anniversary. So as you're probably well aware, most of you, so pretty much every single 5 years for a very, very long time, Harley-Davidson has created an experience and an event all over the world to celebrate our anniversary. Our last one was the 110th, and the big thing about that was one of the first times that we've worked really, really hard to create global experiences and to create global online experiences. So it was the first time that we kind of came up and admitted, hey, not everyone can come to an anniversary event for as much as we would love you to. So how can we have consumers participate, if it's socially, if it's online, and so forth, to feel that they were part of the anniversary without physically being there? So we created a microsite that was translated in most of the languages that we have today, and it included things of, we had a story of a Harley-Davidson jacket that basically went around the world, and we had large amounts of people sign it and so forth, and you kind of followed the story of this jacket within the experience. It was all the way signed even to the Pope at that time. So it was a huge global experience. We did things, for those of you who were in the last presentation, and the gentleman who won the beer from Miller and partnered with us, he had submitted his story through an online story experience also in this hub that came out and kind of let him tell his story of why he loved Harley-Davidson and why he was passionate about it. So letting people like that, and then awarding him in the end with a lifetime of Miller. So it's kind of like, or a year's worth of Miller, but it was one of those things that we had the ability to engage with him and to be part of his life without him physically having to be at an event. A couple other things that are on here. So this is our Authorized rentals site. This is another site that I manage. So like I said, we offer tours that are Harley-Davidson on Harley-Davidson. We have the ability that you can test ride a bike at a dealership. We have the opportunity that you can rent a bike for a day, a week, however long you want, and experience that. And part of that, what that comes down to, is that we know if we can get you to be part of the lifestyle, and we can get you on a Harley-Davidson, if it's a rental, if it's a test ride, if it's a tour, your likely to purchase is so much higher because we've engaged with you and you've kind of got that feeling, and you've got that feeling on a Harley-Davidson versus a different motorcycle. The last one is one of our apps. So we have a pretty standard template at this point in time for event apps. This is an example of one we did in Daytona. We've done the Daytona app, I think, since 2012, 2013 timeframe. It hasn't changed much. for good reasons and for bad reasons, but some of that is because the whole point behind it is to be simplistic and to be easy to use. It doesn't need to be full of glam and so forth. The whole point is, tell me where I can be and when. Doing things like push notifications, as simplistic as when you're at a motorcycle rally, and especially in Sturgis, there's really bad weather coming, get to cover. Those kind of messages to, Willie G. Davidson, who is still very, very active. He is officially retired, but he is not necessarily, is very active and goes to these events to, hey, come and meet him or get a signature, or engaging with our consumers in those ways. But it's also just as much about information and getting you that information and getting you a schedule and getting you a map, and not throwing a whole bunch of information at you that is kind of useless when it comes to you're at an event for a particular reason. So that was HD. This is Hog. So a few things for Hog. So like I said before, Hog is much smaller from a domain standpoint. We only have 12, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. And this is an example of it also exists in a really, really old infrastructure. So this is one of those sites that we live in a really old infrastructure, and I can't make instant updates. It's just not possible. But the ironic part about it is it's responsive. So it's a responsive site that works really, really well on your phone compared to having a different. So it's kind of finding that balance internally of what works for our consumers and what works for us from a business standpoint. So I do work really, really hard to keep this as updated as possible, if not weekly, even more, because of the fact this is one of those places that I need. So I already have these consumers, right? These are owners. These are people who have purchased a bike. But you get a Hog membership when you purchase a motorcycle. After that, you have to renew, which means you have to pay. And depending on what part of the world you live in, that dollar amount or yen amount or wherever you live varies. So for example, in the United States, it costs you right around $50 to renew your membership. You need to see value in why you need to renew that, even for only $50. So I have to work really, really hard from a digital standpoint, because of the fact that if I can provide you updated content, regular things that are important to you as a global consumer, it's more likely that you're going to renew. So one of the things that we have is there is an app, and this is actually an app in EMEA. It is not a global app. It is specific to Europe. It is an app that they developed specifically for consumers to submit photos. So this was long before Instagram, and this was something that they knew, as we showed and as I talked about before, we have a large amount of Instagram followers. We are such a visual brand. People want to show photos for anything, right? But especially for Harley-Davidson. And it's a place that they can go in and they can submit photos. And there is a site that lives in Europe that all of those photos get displayed on. So it's kind of that engagement, and then they can share them in socially and so forth. This one on the bottom is, so one of the things that we've realized, is it digital or if it isn't, from a standpoint of with our Harley owners, is if they don't feel like they have been engaged with, in, as we'll call cliche, welcome to the family, within a very short period of time, they disengage and they have no reason to participate. It doesn't matter what kind of platform that's on, if that's socially, if that's digital, if that's going to events or so forth. So we've created what we call a welcome experience. And what that means is I walk into a dealership, I purchase a motorcycle, I'm physically given a gift that, applies to me as a person. It's a personalized gift. And then I'm sent to a web experience that I get to choose what applies to me. So this was the first time that Hog as an organization really gave the opportunity to a consumer. So I'm not necessarily using that data and say, I know that you purchased a touring model, I'm going to send you to this site. Because the thing that we were trying to do is we were trying to say, so I'm going to give you 3 different experiences of content, urban, so kind of inner city, right? Cruising, kind of in between road, and then touring. So those long, long rides on that big bagger. But the thing about it is originally we were going to say, I knew that you purchased a large-scale touring model, so I'm going to make you and I'm going to push you towards a specific experience. One of the things that we discussed internally and had a lot of conversations even externally was to say, is that the right decision? Should I be choosing what your content is based on the bike that you purchased? So the decision was made basically to say, let them have that choice. So let them choose that content of if they want to learn about kind of urban, city kind of riding, if they want that in-between short ride, 200 to 300 miles, or if they want that long touring, numerous day experience. And the thing that was really interesting is we used, this experience has been live for almost about a year. And we tested it first with what we called a pilot. And now it's been launched out to any person in the United States that purchases a motorcycle at any dealership has this similar experience. There's emails and so forth that are also applied with it. But the thing that's really interesting is over 80% of the people who engaged with this site picked urban, no matter what they purchased. So that was a really good learning for us to say, well, thank goodness we didn't just make an assumption that you purchase a certain kind of motorcycle, which means you want to do a certain kind of riding, because that's basically coming out and saying that you only take your bike out for long tours or for short tours or so forth, and to give the consumer the ability to choose that on their own was something. And we'll continue to kind of test and learn that and see if that changes as we get into more people, and it's less about the pilot group of people. So I talked a little bit about this before, but just a little bit in the sense of, so these are the kind of when we break down our team and kind of who does what and so forth. So for me, I'm really on the strategic and large scale project standpoint. And then we have a lot of people that work within our team that are truly, as I was saying, going into our systems and really updating content. So making sure that content is relevant, making sure that it's current, doing a lot of, like I talked about, user accessibility testing, doing audits in the sense of global audits to make sure that if some market changed something, that it still meets standards. As SEO, which we talked about before, and then the kind of that coordination of daily fixes and so forth. We find out, oh my gosh, something was published in print that was wrong about a motorcycle. Well, we're very blessed that from a digital standpoint, we can fix it just like that, unlike in print, and communicating those sorts of messages. One of the things that we've just kind of started getting into recently, in the past 6 or 8 months, is this kind of Geo-Target Messaging. So really looking at and changing based on, so for example, the museum, it's in Milwaukee, right? We make the assumption that if they're having an event for the weekend, people who live in a different country or even in California aren't necessarily going to come to an event there. So we try to do sorts of things that we can, at least on our homepage, target you based on the fact we know that you live within a 300-mile radius or you live within 6,000 miles, to try to bring that relevant content. And that's really little baby steps for us, but to try to bring that relevant content to you in something that makes it somewhat personalized. So here's some examples of kind of what hd.com looks like today. This is very specific to the motorcycle section. So this is a place where we have consumers, they come to learn everything and anything about a motorcycle. So as I talked about before, we have our mobile site and we have our desktop site, right? So this is a perfect example of what's important on the desktop site and what's important on a mobile phone. So what are people, as they're exploring through a bike, what are they interested in? So we have these, which we call key features or hotspots, depending on what you want to call them. So certain things like that, and the bike turns and things like that, and thinking about as we're building out stuff, and you can change the color of the bike and so forth from a customization standpoint, as I said before, thinking about what's truly important by device. So what am I really going to be doing on a phone that I'm going to be doing on a desktop? Because one of the things that we know, at least specific to hd.com and Harley-Davidson, is people may start on a phone or they may start on a desktop. But the thing about it is ultimately when they're doing that large scale research about what motorcycle they're going to purchase, they're going to do it from their desktop. They're not going to do it from their phone. Even in the world that we live in that everything is small from a device standpoint. So we know what we need to kind of pump up from a desktop standpoint and what's truly important, and finding every single tiny little thing from the specs of the tires and so forth and the chassis that are unbelievably important, because we know that ultimately they're going to do that. So that's one of the things to think about as you guys are, moving on and moving into jobs and talking about websites and so forth. Think about your consumers, and yes, you need to remember that you need to have everything device agnostic. Of course you do. That's the world that we live in. But also think about that flow of that consumer and where that consumer is coming from and what they're doing while they're on their phone. Do not make an assumption that just because they're on the desktop or just because they're on their phone, they should be the exact same experience. Definitely in the world we live of responsive, definitely, but there's plenty of things from a responsive code standpoint that we can do to add things and delete things and still have that site be responsive. So that's all I have. It's not a ton, but I definitely have, if you guys have any specific questions when it comes to digital marketing at Harley, what I talked about before, from a keynote standpoint, please feel free to jump up, and I don't know if you guys want a mic or yell. There's a small enough group, so. Okay. Anybody? Got to go to the mic. I know it's just right after lunch, guys, but come on. I don't have any cool videos to show you either. I showed them to y'all before.
I don't know too much about e-commerce like right now as of my point in my collegiate career, but you said you measure sort of an app or a website based on responsiveness. Could you clarify exactly what that means, how people respond to the website, or what you gain, some sort of variable thing?
So I think, as I was saying before, so we do, and e-commerce is a great example. So hd.com and our e-commerce site are managed by completely different teams. I do not manage our site at all from an e-commerce standpoint. But the thing about it is we have an e-commerce site that you have the ability to go and purchase, but e-commerce is a great example of if I'm exploring, so I'll use a Harley-Davidson heated gear. We'll use as an example. So if I'm interested in saying, I want to purchase this a particular kind of heated gear jacket, a lot of people will go back and forth from a phone standpoint to a desktop standpoint, right? So we need to ensure that there is enough information on that phone that I can kind of start that exploration process. I can definitely transact the whole way through, that it's an easy experience to transact the whole way through, because for those of us who use our phone for online purchases, the ease is a huge issue and security is a huge issue. So a lot of people in today's world still believe, especially use the my age range and older, a lot of people believe they don't want to purchase something on a phone because it's not safe, because there's so many instances of breaches, which ironically have nothing to do with a phone or a desktop. But the thing I would say is when it comes to that sort of purchase experience, the thing you have to think about is if I'm going to purchase this jacket, am I going to do every single piece of research on that phone, or if I'm going to do some of it? So you have to think about the fact to ensure that there's enough contact on that phone to get me interested and so forth, but there's also, if I need to look at specific specs or really learn more information, there's still that desktop experience. Because we're still, and I'm still truly a believer, desktop's not going away tomorrow. So yes, I mean, I 100% agree. That thing that's in your hand 24 hours a day, I'm also one of those people, and you have the ability for anyone to contact you at any second, yes, but there are certain things that you'll never get out of that phone that you're going to get out of a desktop experience or even a tablet experience. I mean, tablets have definitely helped us a lot in the sense of because of just the sheer screen size and as phones get larger. But I think just thinking about it it's not just about, like I said, it's not just about being responsive. It's about remembering, even if you're responsive, what the consumer is doing on that, and understanding your customer enough to know what they're doing on that particular device. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I'm not really sure how to phrase this or put it together, but so the store back home, they partnered with KTM. So our town just opened up like a motocross track, and so they partnered together. Do you have any involvement in that at all, or just because it's a local store, they do all of that on their own?
So generally, we know about it sometimes, but we don't have involvement in the sense of doing any of the contractual dealership, you know what I mean, that kind of stuff from a legal standpoint, that's all up to them. So generally, because they are independently owned entities, we have about this much control, right? So we can do things and we can say, your price points have to at least start here. You can't, undersell your neighbors kind of thing. We're very careful in the sense of Harley-Davidson doesn't put anything on sale because of the thought process behind that is very destructive to the brand, because we're not cheap and we should never be looked at as cheap in the sense of cheapened, not cost-wise. But things like that, dealerships have their own ability to create events and partner and that kind of thing. Only certain dealerships have the agreement and the ability to sell other products. So meaning there are dealerships all over the world, let alone the US, that don't just sell Harley-Davidsons or partner in that kind of way. So yeah, I mean, they have to take it on. They can definitely reach out to us for help and say, and we have what we call district managers that represent all over the world. And their district manager should have true insight into exactly that and make sure that they're not doing anything that's against the brand and looks bad for the brand. Because I think that's really interesting is, yes, we are, one gigantic organization with independent owners, but if an independent owner does something that looks bad on the brand, it looks bad on the brand for everyone. So we try not to be too involved because they are independently owned, but we definitely try to ensure that the company knows about it, but also lets them have their freedom to do things. Because that's the other thing too, is every single dealership, we can hand them over assets and we can hand them over, if they're digital or if they're print or if they're event ideas or so forth, they have to make the decision and they have to try to use that based on what they think is right. And they have their own financial models. We're not funding that, so.
Hi, I have a question. How do you deal with your international team? So you said like you have offices all over the world and they have a time difference. How do you deal with this? And of course, there's a language barrier. So how do you like make this content for different countries? For example, if just translated may not work as well as here in US. And how do you develop all this?
That's a great question. So the thing is the way that we're broke down from an organization standpoint. So I work on the global team, which means I work with all over the world, which is awesome most days, except for when it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm on conferences calls with Singapore. So, but that's a perfect example, right? So internally, we as a global team are kind of never turned off, right? Because we as a global team in my office in Juneau Avenue represent the entire globe. So we have to be available, right? But I'll take as an example right now from your question about kind of translations and so forth. So we work with large-scale translation organizations that help us and create databases and so forth to help from a translation standpoint. And the cool thing is, for us, at least for someone like me, so in our offices all over the world, there are English-speaking people and there are in-language-speaking people. So for example, we have call centers that help our consumers all over the world. Those are in language based on what country you're in. But as far as people who work with corporate, there is always someone within the office that speaks in English standpoint, so they can work with us from a global standpoint, and people who live in the US as well as from a global standpoint so that they can represent their own market. But your point about messaging, so one of the things that we always have to think about from a global standpoint, and I'm actually working through a project right now specifically to the Harley Owners Group, we're coming up with as simplistic as some taglines, right? So we have to think about, as I'm writing messaging and working with my global agencies, to say, we're trying to write one single consistent message for the globe, for the Harley Owners Group. That is not easy because of the fact that when you step back and you think of how people translate things, so if you use specific words in the US that in Europe are looked at as profanity or looked at as in Asia Pacific as being an insult to a female. You know what I mean? There's those sorts of things that I may not know as someone who lives in the US and has grown up in Wisconsin and isn't close to that, but we use our partners within the offices and within our markets to have those conversations so that I can relay a message and say, hey, this is what I want it to convey to our consumers. This is what I'm thinking, and that they can come back and say, okay, to translate that in Arabic is not gonna work. So we do as much as we can to try to give these global consistent messages, but we also kind of have this, as we'll call regional flavor, we'll call it, right? So it's kind of one of those things that we want to convey this ultimate message, but in particular regions, it's not going to necessarily work. And that's not specific to digital, right? That can be specific to any kind of marketing material that we do that is going to be something that they may have to change it just as little, because honestly, the simplistic things is just as simple as a single word can make huge changes from a translation standpoint. But I'm really, really blessed in the sense of, our offices get realistically smaller and smaller and smaller as you go. You know what I mean? Like our European office has a lot more people than our office that's in Singapore that I work with 2 people. You know what I mean? So it's and they have a huge part of the world to represent. But we're really blessed in the sense that they understand their cultures and their markets so well that as we're working with them, it makes it so much easier for us as a corporate organization to say, this is what we want to convey, but we also understand you may have to change or tweak that message or even your output or your channel to know that, because for example, for a very long time, take China as an example, Facebook wasn't allowed in China. They don't agree with social media. A lot of governmental kind of rules that we don't have in the US. So having for them to think about, so this is a message we're going to communicate through social media, how are you going to do it? And they have to be the people that have to know their country and their markets and so forth to be able to do that.
What's something that you did early on in your career that's helped you to get to the position you are, like development-wise, leaders, things you followed?
Can it be luck? No, I'm kidding. Some of it I think of it as. I think for me, I've been unbelievably blessed at Harley. I mean, I started, and it was kind of the woman who spoke before me this morning, Joan, and her question about how did you get a job with the Green Bay Packers? I applied. Exactly the same thing happened to me. I applied for a job at Harley, and I got it. I mean, it was one of those things that I was on the print side of things back then. I was not on the digital side, and it was kind of that fit kind of was perfect for what I had experience for compared to what I was moving into. But I think the thing for me at Harley is I've had a great opportunity to work with and to move. And as we have transcended from, the world has moved from print to digital, I've had that opportunity. But I think the biggest thing for me, and my colleagues may not agree with me, is I'm the kind of person, give me anything and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it well, or I'm going to do the best that I can, right? So don't sit there and say, hey, this particular thing, I don't really like it, I don't want to do it, it's boring. We all have things in our lives, in our jobs that we don't like to do, right? So I think when you get looked at as the kind of person who, everybody in my group, in the groups that I work with, knows you can give me anything and I'm going to do it for you. I may not want to, not going to lie, but just being ambitious, right? So I definitely work with a lot of people even to this day that are really happy with where they are right now. And they don't necessarily want to move up the ladder. That is very different for me. I've worked really, really hard, and I have been given some amazing opportunities to work on some pretty significantly large multi-million-dollar projects within the organization. But I've also never said no to that $1,000, let's get a dealer letter out experience. You know what I mean? And the thing about it, and to always remember, is yes, those big projects will get your name out there, they'll get you in front of people, they'll get you the visibility that you need, but it's those little projects that when you helped out somebody because they needed it, and they needed it done within 15 minutes, and they needed someone that they could trust, is what's gonna make people remember you. And I don't think that has anything to do with Harley-Davidson, right? That has to do with who you are and how much ambition you have and how willing you are to say, I'll take it and I'll do it and I'll get it done, and you'll get it done on time, huge deal, and that you'll get it done well. So one of the things I will tell you is, for me, is probably a biggest pet peeve, is that when I ask someone to do something and I give them the task and I think that they understand it, and that they go off and that either it's delayed because they didn't know what they were supposed to do and they didn't just come and ask. I'm a pretty approachable person. You know what I mean? I have an intern right now, and one of the things that I love about her is that she will sit down, she will talk to me, but if she has questions and she doesn't understand something, just go and ask. No one's ever gonna knock you for that. So, because for me, if I ask you to do something and it doesn't get done, that affects me as a manager because you're doing it probably for someone else, for me. So, it's just those little things, I think, that make a huge difference. Just remember, it's not always about the big projects. For as much as we all love the big stuff with lights and, everybody sees and so forth, if you're going to make that best impression, and that biggest impression is also succeeding with the little things. It's my opinion. Everyone in my world might not agree with me, but. Anyone else? We have a really quiet room. Cool. Okay, thanks, guys.